Okay, here we go. So I'm Serina. I think many of you know me, and if you don't know me, hello. I've been an architect for the past 20 years in the Bay Area, and I'm pretty passionate, in addition to my architecture practice, about helping other architects and engineers kind of improve their service because we're all facing a lot of the same challenges and problems in our practices. Today's session is going to cover a little bit more in-depth dive into the property information map. I do have sort of an enhanced version of this map, and we are going to go through some of those features, but the focus today is really going to be on things like how to empower your team to do property research, how to show up for your clients and really impress them, how to make sure that you're not leaving money on the table in your proposal. I think that's a big one for all of us. We're all trying to make sure that we're thriving, not just surviving in our industry. So we're going to kick off today with a couple of things. First, I want to just do a shout out. If anybody wants to throw in, hey, please cover this, or I want to know about that, this is your moment. But we also are going to kind of, as we go through, make it a little bit interactive. So feel free to, turn your videos on or unmute yourself if you've got questions kind of through the presentation. So is there anything specific anybody wants me to cover today that you showed up specifically to kind of find out about? Okay, all right, not hearing anybody. So if you have something and you're still on mute, feel free to unmute, but here we go. All right, the basics. Most of you probably work in San Francisco, I have to assume. So the basics are, what do you see when you come to the property information map? Each one of these tabs holds the different information for a variety of context. So when someone calls me, for example, and says, hey, I have a new property, or the one I get the most often is, hey, I'm in escrow and I need to know immediately what I can do with my project. I come in here, I start in the property tab. I always take a quick look and see in the assessor summary how many units there are. One little thing to note about this is that the assessor's office counts commercial spaces as a unit. So you might only have 14 residential units, but it might say 16 because there's 2 ground floor commercial spaces or something. So that's a pretty important thing to clarify. This can come up and cause a lot of problems for you if the number of units they have on site doesn't match the number that the city thinks that they have. So that's kind of one of the first places I check. I also take a quick look here at the year built. Sometimes I also will kind of take a look and see what's the assessed value. And the reason that I'll look at that is kind of to determine, is this a recent sale? Was it sold relatively recently to someone and it's got a really high tax base? And that just tells me if I'm dealing with a new owner, they may not have a lot of records on the property or a lot of history on the property. So I always start there. I also go down here and I always pull up the assessor's block map because I want to get a sense for what are the property dimensions, what are we dealing with, especially if they're calling me about something that's like a rear yard addition. I want to push out in the backyard. I'll pull this up and see really quickly, okay, how big is the lot? And then the next step, I think for most of us, is to go into zoning information and see then what is the zoning requirements and restrictions here. So I try, before I even have a discovery call with a customer or a new client, to figure out what the setbacks are, what the height limits are. If they're calling about a commercial project, like they have a business use, I try to take a quick look just, in the planning code here to see, is your use permitted? Is it something that you can even do, or are you asking for the moon? I also really like to come in here when I've kicked off for a potential new client, even before I meet them. Sometimes I'll take a look and see, how much density can they have here. So in this case, if there's no density by lot area, I can show up then and say, hey, you have a lot of opportunity with this property, and here's how I know that. So I'm always kind of keeping an eye on whether or not I can impress a potential new client just by doing some very, very basic quick research. So for me, what I tend to do, not so much in San Francisco because it's so complex, but in other cities, I'll send my junior staff out to find out what are the height restrictions, parking restrictions, density, what's the permit timeline looking like, and what's the process like? Because if I'm talking to a client and I've never worked in, let's say, I don't know, Green Bay or Palo Alto or something like that, which I have, but if I haven't, or if it's been a long time, I want to know what is the kind of process going to be like, and how long is it going to take for a various scope of work? Some of that you can get on the PIM, but in general, a lot of those questions about timing and permit processes are going to be you're calling the planning staff or you're calling the building department. So whether or not you trust your junior staff to do some of this research for you or not, it is something that I kind of generally will try to have them go tackle. Okay, something else that I want to point out. So over here, we have this little map. And as you go through each of these tabs, the property tab, you'll see over here these map layers. You can turn these things on and off and sort of see, you know, what's the supervisor district. I don't use that one very often, but the ones that I do use the most often are if I'm in a unique zoning district. You can kind of turn that on. If I butt up, I like to see if I butt up against another zone, because there are some sections of the planning code that allow you to use whatever the adjacent zoning is. Usually it's the opposite direction. This particular site I'm using for the demo is in an NCT, but oftentimes if there's like a commercial space in an RH zone, but it's adjacent to an NCT district, sometimes you can get your client a little bump. There's some exceptions in the planning code that will help you get them a commercial use, even in a residentially zoned building. The other things that I tend to use this for are environmental. So you'll see here, there's a couple of little zones here. For me, the air pollutant exposure zone, you know, they've noted right here that they've added this property to this. I don't know how many of you have had to deal with this, but it used to be pretty straightforward, and they've gotten a lot more aggressive about this. So you have to get a mechanical engineer. They want a full report. They want mechanical ventilation in residential projects, etc. So this one can be kind of time consuming. This will affect your proposal. So I like to kind of see, I'll use this map and kind of turn things on and off to sort of see what's going on around the site as well. Their map is a little slow today, but the other thing that I'll use it for is planning applications. So many of us have to deal with variance processes in the city. And so I'm actually going to just open this map up. You can all see the new enlarged map, right? Thumbs up. If I'm doing a variance, sometimes what I'll do is I'll just turn on the variance feature here into this map. And it'll pop up and populate all of the variances within a radius. You know, you can zoom in and out of this map and it will expand. Because I like to see if some of the neighbors have had variances for project scope like what I'm doing. For instance, like adding a garage in the front or parking in the rear yard, or I don't know, there's a bunch of different little things that we deal with, rear stair replacement. It helps make your case when you're presenting your variance to planning staff to say these 5 properties within X radius have obtained successfully variances for the same scope of work. So I'll use it for things like that. The other thing that I sometimes will do in here is Cortese list. This is a big one. How close are we to an underground leaking storage tank? Whether it's been remediated or not, it may push you into an environmental review. So I do sort of try to check and see, is there anything that's even remotely close to my site? So I do use this map. I don't use it a ton, but if you're looking for really granular detail on something, I think this can be just a really useful feature in general. Any questions about this so far?
No.
No, okay. All right, so The other thing that I like to kind of check into is historic status, obviously. That's one of the first things I look at when I'm talking about a new project. Now, I think many of you, if you're working in San Francisco, you know, Class B just means that you are over 50 years old, and changes to the exterior facades that face the public right-of-way are going to get reviewed by preservation. I've noticed in the last year specifically that the planning staff and preservation staff is treating all Class B buildings as if they are already assumed to be a Class A. So what you can do if you've got a Class B, so the things that I'm seeing them do are like, now you can't do clad wood windows in a lot of replacements. They're wanting full wood window replacements. They're wanting true divided lights or simulated divided lights, but the real good looking ones that cost a lot of money. So one of the little tidbits I'll share with you is that I've spoken to Liz Waddy a couple times about this. She is a strong advocate for applying for a historic resource assessment. For any building that's a Class B, it takes 60 days for the city to review. It costs about $600 for the permit fee. It does mean that as architects or engineers, we have to do quite a bit more research up front on the property, but 85% of properties in the city get downgraded from a Class B to a Class C. And once you're a Class C, you can strip the facade off, you can change the whole frontage, you can change windows, you have a lot more flexibility from a design perspective with what you can do. So planning staff has really been advocating for applying for a historic resource assessment. So I'm going to just plant that seed for you. I think, you know, we're all trying to find ways to stay competitive and help bring value for our clients. And so this is one of those little sneaky things that they don't really tell you, but I'm sharing with you. Other things that I look for are, okay, if you are a Class B, or let's say you're a Class A, are you in a designated historic landmark district? So I've done a couple of properties fronting onto Alamo Square. That means I'm going to the Historic Preservation Commission for anything in the front of the building or anything visible. And I've even had them say like a skylight in the middle of the building or like a minor roof change that's, you know, even 15 feet back from the front facade still triggers this review. So in the spirit of thinking about writing your proposal and getting it right, obviously additional hearings and public notice and the potential for your neighbors to be complaining about things can cause difficulty. And we want to make sure we've included that in our proposal and given our client a heads up, hey, this is a possibility if you go down this route with your design that you're going to have to deal with this. So, you know, an Article 10 district is going to add 6 to 9 months to your permit timeline because you're going to go to Historic Preservation Commission. You're also going to pay thousands of dollars in permit fees, and they're going to need to pay you as the professional for filing that certificate of appropriateness. Article 11 is, again, that's another historic district. This is the one where they really want to see a bunch of demolition calculations, although I'm finding that, again, they're requiring that even on the most basic of projects. Class B, they're saying we want demolition calculations regardless. So this is a pretty important one to kind of keep in mind. A couple of other things that I'll show you in here. Environmental is another one. So we already talked about air pollutant exposure zone. This is something, again, that you'll need to facilitate for your client. If you're doing, I believe it's residential projects, and I think it's triggered by adding new residential units. So I have a project where we're converting some commercial spaces upstairs in the envelope into residential units because it's zoned for that. And they're asking us to do this full mechanical evaluation. So again, something to keep in mind, you want to make sure to include that in your proposal. Other things that I like to flag in here, really critical things in here. I like to always look at complaints. And the reason that I look at complaints is to see, is there a mess at this site that I have to clean up? This is a great example, this property. They've got a window replacement without permits. They're in a planning enforcement. For those of you that are not familiar, people can call and complain a variety of ways about a project. They can call 311, which is this code enforcement piece down here. They can call the building department, and that's what you see here with these kinds of things, these, this list down here. Most people will call building inspection for a complaint. But planning is a special beast, and somebody that calls the planning department and reports a violation, you're triggered into a whole other set of scrutiny. I have found the planning enforcement to be far more aggressive and, pardon my term, but evil in compared to the building department. The building department will send somebody out, they'll send an inspector. The inspector will come out and say, oh, hey, I knocked on the door, nobody answered. And then they'll just file it in the report. And then a few months later, they'll send another guy out and they'll say, oh, I couldn't gain access, et cetera. But planning staff, the minute that they get a violation, it goes to enforcement and they start charging fees pretty much immediately. So I immediately, even if I'm doing the most basic scope of work at a project, like let's say the commercial guy wants to convert his yogurt shop to a cafe, whatever, it's not a change of use, it's in the same use category. But if there are open enforcement cases, I know that I'm going to end up having to clean those up in order to get his permit approved. So this is a big one for your proposal. And also, this is a big one when you show up for that very first client meeting. If you're showing up and saying, listen, I already see a lot of red flags here that I'm going to have to deal with, unless you can get the property owner to deal with, this one adds, I think, a lot of value to your process. The other way that I use this particular section of enforcement is to see, does this seem like, if it's the property owner specifically, does this seem like somebody I want to work with? We all struggle, I think, to determine whether or not to write a proposal for somebody. We meet somebody for 20 minutes, maybe an hour, and we're tied to them then for 1, 2, even 5 years, depending on the scope of their project. So I like to kind of tag those red flags a little bit up front. In this case, we're helping with this code enforcement problem, so I came in fully aware, but I look and I see if there's a bunch of violations in here and they're all things that seem like habitability, or they seem like things that are life safety, that aren't being corrected, I get concerned and I start to question whether or not I'm really going to want to work with this particular client. I look at code enforcement. This will tell you things even for like noise violations. So, there's a lot of different information in here. This part down here is an enhanced version. You're not going to have this on your standard property map, but I use it to just see, is there an open fire violation here? Is there, because fire violations get handled in a different way. So anything that might hold up my ability to do my job and get the permit processed and approved, that would also impact my proposal. This is a really important section, is to just take a look at the complaints, even if you're not looking at the enhanced version. Any questions about that so far?
Serina, just a quick question. I've actually never seen anything listed for those bottom 4. And so I wonder, where is that information being pulled from? And do you think I'm just not looking at the right properties, or?
You mean down here?
Yeah. I've never seen anything listed for those.
Yeah, so this is something, Emily, you're a customer Property Atlas, right?
Yes.
So this should be on your map, and if it isn't, let's figure that out for you later.
Yeah, it's on there. I've just I haven't come across a building yet that actually has anything listed, and so I wasn't.
Yeah, it's possible there may not be. Okay. These are kind of map based. So in this, I did a little preliminary research. I've seen the same thing. I've had some where I've come to and you look at it and there's no flags on it. These all come from a city database that if somebody calls in a 311, it shows up in here. Some of these, though, you'll see some of these are kind of older. Even I think this one is from 2017, this noise complaint, which isn't particularly relevant to this case. And as you scroll through and look at all the various ones that have been filed over the years, they may not even be active. But these are tied to just public data. So anytime somebody calls in a violation, like this one, I think was something about fire extinguishers. And you'll see here, it says this one was abated. It's from 2019.
I actually didn't realize that you click on the the
Yeah.
title in order to drop it down. So now I'm seeing it.
A little pin, yes, exactly.
Thank you. Okay.
Good, I'm glad we're having this session. This one is an alarm system maintenance, and it was abated. So there may not be open cases, but it helps you at least see if there's something weird going on. And for me, like when I deal with commercial clients, like if I'm working on a bar or a restaurant, you know, fire safety complaints and violations aren't on this main property map. So I like to see, are they having problems with their egress or their inspections, since those buildings get inspected on a regular circuit with the fire department.
So when I'm seeing that little blue logo or icon down at the bottom, is that giving me a hint that it's a clickable item, or just enhanced by property items?
This just means that we've enhanced it.
Okay.
Anytime you see our little logo, and the one place we didn't put it up is up here.
Okay.
One of the first places that I also go when I have a new project that I'm looking at is I like to pull up Google Maps, and this just saves me from having to kind of run the search. I can go straight to the street view or the aerial photo, and I can kind of get a sense of what's going on in that backyard and do we have an issue. So that's the only one that doesn't. That's the only feature we have that doesn't have our little logo next to it on the enhanced version. Okay, there's another little thing that I'm going to flag for you guys. Again, in the spirit of like, nobody wants to go to their client and go back to their client and ask for more money. Ad services and change orders are unpopular both for them and for us. There's a little goofy thing here. So corner lots. So many of you, how many of you have had difficulties with DPW?
Yes.
Everyone? Yes, everyone. Okay. So we are trying to get a DPW permit tracker. It's not publicly available yet, so they haven't published the data to give to us yet. They are working on it internally, but I think they've got bigger problems lately. One of the things that I've seen come up pretty regularly is, does my client need to file a minor encroachment for that front step that sticks out over the sidewalk? Does my client need to file a minor encroachment for that light fixture, that sconce that sticks out, or that takeout window that comes out across the property line? So I like to always check and see, is there a right-of-way exception? Has there been, sometimes I think street use permits are only for the contractor parking. So this will be able to, this map, again, it's an enhancement, but it tells me, is there another application that I might need to file? So I can look and see. I'll share with you guys, I had a client where I was trying to get ahead of them. They had a big warped sidewalk on their property. And I said, oh, that's going to be a flag. DPW is going to make you get a minor encroachment for that. And I sent them down the path because I knew it was going to take like a year of getting the survey, getting the application in. We filed it, and DPW came back and said, oh, you already have a minor encroachment on file for this. And I was like, oh my God, I would never have known that, right? So here I was trying to help my client preempt this difficulty, and instead I cost them some money and time in going through a process they didn't need to because there was already one on file. So you can call DPW and ask for status on that. I think there is an online tracker, but frankly, I've never had success with it. So definitely I would say on these, when you are getting ready to write your proposal, take a look, find out if there's a minor encroachment, especially if you've noticed that there's something on the site that's going to trigger that. The other little sneaky one I'll tell you is the curb ramps. So the majority of our work is doing ADUs, which means we're very often taking out driveways. And DPW has this little one-line section in their code that I find very vague, that sort of says, if you're making improvements in the public right-of-way, you need to comply with all San Francisco codes. And they've interpreted that to mean you have to replace the sidewalk to the new ADA standards. I have a lot of problems with that, but that's how they as a department have interpreted. So what I find, especially on corner lots, is that not only do they make you replace the little section where your driveway is coming out, but they'll actually make you replace the whole frontage on both sides of the building, including the curb ramp. And so there is a curb ramp I don't know that they have like a map that you can look up, but they have evaluated the condition of all of the curb ramps in the city. And it'll tell you the date that it was evaluated, what the score is. And so if you've got 100, it means great, you're fully compliant. Even if you have to replace the sidewalk, you're not going to have to replace the curb ramp. But more often what I find is this is some number less than 100. And they're going to trigger it, even if it's been recently replaced by DPW. So again, that's one of those things that for you is going to add coordination time with the civil engineer, coordination and follow-up time with DPW, and you're going to want to advise your client, hey, this is another $5,000, $10,000 item that you're going to need to factor into your budget. So just giving you a heads up. Again, if you're not a subscriber to Property Atlas, you can get this information by contacting DPW. So just, be aware.
The other thing I've been running into quite recently is the need to confirm that there are no historic tags. And I didn't realize that you have a link to that in the sidewalk map, but that's super helpful.
Yeah, the sidewalk map I find also really obnoxious, and we're trying to make this a lot simpler. This is a website you can go to. You don't need Property Atlas for this, but this is just a subdivision map. It's annoying that you can't just put in the address. You can do the block and lot number, I think, but I often just have to sort through this whole thing. So like this one's on Divisadero. And then you have to remember what the cross is, which I always have to go back and look up. And there's this little, I think you're talking about this monument button right here, right, Emily?
Yes.
Yeah. So again, when you click on these, also obnoxious, it will pull this TIFF image up here. And then once you get in here, it'll show you, what's in here. I use this in a couple of ways. I don't use this particular map. I go to this middle one, the grade one, most often. And the reason that I go here is to check and see if the measurement I took in the field on the sidewalk is the same. Sorry, and then they reorient some of these. They're in different orientations, which is really annoying. So I like to check the sidewalk width. So you can see this little 10-foot number right here and right here. So in residential projects, especially where I'm doing ADUs, they want you to landscape that front section of the front yard. So we actually will take a quick measurement of the sidewalk when we're out there doing our preliminary during our initial site measure, and then we confirm this. So if it matches what the city has 10 feet here or 12 feet here on the opposite side, then I know we don't have a front yard to contend with. But if it doesn't match, then I know we're going to have to do some of that landscaping in the front. So again, that's one of those little items that, will save you on the plan check review if you've just double checked this. And it's a clunky, cumbersome little map, but it will give you the sidewalk dimensions. It also is going to give you, sorry, I'll open up again, the sidewalk slopes and the street slopes here. They're not necessarily 100% accurate, but again, if you're dealing with some kind of ADA situation, if you're working with a commercial client, I find this can be really helpful, just getting a baseline so that you know going in how difficult it's going to be to help that client achieve their compliance. Okay, let's see. Other things that I like to look at when I'm thinking about my proposal. So I always check the permit history, and I do this for a couple of reasons. One, so that when I go meet with that client, I at least can sound like I know a lot about their project already. I can say, oh, I saw that you did a foundation replacement, or I saw that you had a kitchen remodel, or I saw that you haven't done the roof for the last, whatever, 20 years or something like that. So I sometimes will come in with a little bit of advice around that. But moreover, what I use this for is to see how many open permits they have. And are they overlapping with the scope that the client has asked me for? So in this case, this is a replacement of windows. And actually this permit also is a replacement of windows. So this is a little bit of a potential conflict. So I like to look and see, am I going to have to facilitate a permit withdrawal for this client so that I can then file my permit for the work that I'm doing? And or can I just file my plans as a revision to an already open permit, which could be a little bit simpler of a process with the city. So depending on what the condition and situation is, I do like to make sure, again, if there's time that I need to spend cleaning up some permit nonsense or some complaint nonsense for them, I like to make sure that I factored that into my proposal before I write it. Block book notifications. Does everybody know what these are?
No.
Okay. Nobody knows what these are. Planning didn't really do a good job of explaining. So they introduced a program a few years ago. They partnered with another company called Building Eye. And what it did was it was supposed to give people in the community better transparency around the permits in their neighborhood happening near to them. Obviously, the result of that is that people were able to file a request to be notified anytime there's a permit filed within a certain radius of an address. So if my nosy neighbor upstairs wanted to know everybody's business within 150 feet, they can put themselves on this block book notification list. And actually what it does is when a permit's filed in that zone or within that building even, planning will send them a notification of the permit that's been filed. And there can be a 20-day waiting period for that person to contest your permit. So this is another one of those little sneaky areas. Nobody tells you what it means. And it could really delay your project, and it could really railroad what your client's trying to do with their property. So I like to just, again, try to come into that first meeting and say, hey, I saw that you got this block book notification. That means one of your neighbors is going to potentially be a problem for you. The other little thing that I'll tell you in this little map, there's one other thing that I saw in here that I also like to check, especially if I know that I'm going to be going to a public hearing. Down here, there's this little section called discretionary review public initiated. And you can turn this on and you can see how many nosy neighbors do you have? How many people do you have filing discretionary reviews in your radius? Are you going to have one of those people that is a community group that gets 5 or 10 people together and shows up at your hearing after never contacting you in order to derail your project, or that files a discretionary review and you've never heard of them? So I do like to kind of take a look at that. Again, I'm just looking for red flags. I'm looking for challenges that I'm going to have to deal with so that I can preemptively notify my client, hey, this might happen. And if it does, here's the process. So that one I always like to have a quick look at too. You can also see the mandatory ones. I'm not really sure what a mandatory discretionary review is. I think I'm honestly not sure. If anybody knows, I'm open to it. I'm open to learning about it, but that might be another one you would want to check. So you can kind of start to see, are there going to be some difficulties that you're going to have to deal with the people around you? So this one I think is pretty important. All it's going to say in here is yes or no. And frankly, planning staff will not share the name or email address of that person with you. Although once they've sent them the documents, if that person comes back with additional follow-up questions, sometimes planning staff will put you in direct communication with that person so that you can assuage their fears and send them, be as transparent as you need to be. Okay. Something else, this is, again, it's only a property atlas feature, and between us as an architect, I don't use this very often, but for ADUs and for some other projects in the city, a past eviction on file can really derail your project. So I don't ever do this research. It's not part of my service. I don't think architects should bother, but sometimes if I have a really unsophisticated property owner who has maybe just bought a property or is thinking about buying and it's their first time, I'll just take a quick look and see. And the city has published the information about evictions, rent board petitions, buyout agreements, etc. But they don't give you the information by address for privacy reasons. So what I do, I've only done this once or twice for certain clients, is I'll write down, I'll send them a list of the eviction ID numbers that are within that block of their property. I'll just write these little eviction ID numbers down in a quick email and say, please contact the rent board and do some research. I do think a lot of people don't know, especially when they're purchasing a property, they don't think to check into this. And it could really derail their project depending on the scope of work that they want to do. So I'm generally in favor, especially since I get a lot of calls from real estate people going like, oh, my client's in contract on this property and we need to know these things right now. I will tell them, go to the rent board and do the research before you close sale, before you close escrow, because they can really derail projects. So this is really only in here for my property management clients and some of the real estate people that I deal with, but every once in a while it is an add value that I can add to a client to say, hey, this is something you're going to want to look into before you close escrow and or before we proceed at all with your project. Like, don't sign my proposal until you've checked the eviction history on your project, on your property, because there's no point in us starting work and then there's bad blood because they've started work on something that they can't actually build. Okay, so those are kind of the hot items, I think, for proposals. Is there any other questions about the stuff I've covered so far, or any other areas here that you want us to get into?
Are you working on this for Oakland?
Yes.
Sweet.
Yes, Oakland, San Jose, LA.
Awesome.
It's going to be a little while coming out. We're still in the early stages and always looking for funding to help us grow. But yes, that definitely. To be honest, the reason I started building this is because I had a project in San Diego. I had a client that would have hired me in a minute. I've worked with him for a decade. And he called me with this job in San Diego and I couldn't even find the assessor's map. So I couldn't even do a basic density calculation for him. And I couldn't get the job, you know, it was really frustrating. So yeah, this is my champion. Okay, I'm gonna spend a couple minutes just showing you some of the other enhancements we've made for Property Atlas. And the reason I'm gonna show you is really, you know, in case you're on the fence about thinking about trying it out. So as I mentioned earlier, doing a historic evaluation on a project and potentially declassifying it from a B to a C is going to open up a lot of opportunities for your designs. And we've enhanced this by adding a bunch of features in here that I use all the time. One of them is for records. When I start a project, I generally always will do a permit record search. And a fun fact, a little tip, is that if the property address has changed for a property over time, or the street name has changed over time since it was built, there will be records that you will not find by simply giving them the current address. So when I was researching, for example, my own Victorian property, I found out that, and you do need for some of these records, you do need a library card. So I'll just give you a heads up. I was able to see that the number had changed, and I was able to find even more permits for, so we'll just do my house. Nope, that didn't do it. So the Sanborn, everybody's familiar, I think, with Sanborn maps, but also there's these fire insurance maps. Sanborn maps can be sometimes difficult to find the right ones, but the fire insurance maps tend to be pretty comprehensive. So I'm able to kind of come in here. I think this one was in like volume 3. And for these, if you've never done this before, you just zoom in, you find the intersection where the property is. In this case, Divisadero. Some of these are oriented in a different way that I struggle to find. Anyway, you find this number. So let's say we're going to number 305, and then you just scroll down through here to 305. And that's going to give you the block map for that property. And you're going to be able to see, these are the addresses, 101, 103, and over here 602 for this corner lot that's here. So that may not match what the current address is. So when you're doing a property research, I find these things super, super helpful. You can actually just click this little button up here and download the JPEG and have that for your historic resource assessment file. You want to go through all the different years from whenever you think it was built onward. But we've added things in here. You can find out these water tap records, I think are great. They're organized by street name. You do need to generally know the volume number, but it takes a little research. It takes a little time, but it's a much quicker process than having to go to the library. So for instance, if your project here is on, this is DeBoom Street, I've never even heard of that. You have to kind of zoom in a little bit on these, but you can see, again, these are organized by the street number. So you want to know the original property address using those fire insurance maps. And then it will tell you right here, this was hooked up on the 1st of, I think that says October in 1882. So that'll give you the actual original construction date. And from that, then you can kind of go through more records. So I use these all the time. We've been advocating for our clients to do a lot of these applications. And if you've never done a historic resource assessment, you basically need to do full permit history, original construction date, owners from like a list of all the property owners, which unfortunately you still do have to go to the assessor's office to get, and any tenant information. So the city directories we've added in here help get you there. Although many of them, the older ones, are not organized by address, they're organized by name, which is kind of obnoxious. Historic photos, we've added the links here to the old historic photos. These are scanned in from the public library, and you can just kind of click on them, and over here you'll see any of the pictures that are within that area. They're organized pretty well. It's a mixed bag. And then we provided links to other San Francisco library resources. For those of you that have never gone to it, this David Rumsey composite map, it's an aerial photograph from 1938. It's super high resolution. It helps you make a case when you have one of those rear yard structures that the planning department wants proof about. And then there isn't any because A, there were no permits on file for that stupid thing, but B, again, you may not have found that fire insurance map that showed it back there. That is another useful function of the fire insurance maps and the Sanborn maps, though, is they can show you some of those rear yard structures that you may not have been able to track down through permit records. They will have documented it, and at least you can show that it was there. So I do like to use these. You can zoom way in on it, and they've got the street names imposed on here. So it's a pretty easy and useful resource. So this is an important one if you're doing historic resource assessments, I think. The other thing that I will show you is in our dashboard. So we have automated permit tracking. I use this because I run about 25 projects at a time. And so every Monday, I don't even have to go in and manually type in my permit search requests. I can just click on this little button for all of my projects and get right to the permit status. And then we also offer real-time updates. So every day, if there's been any change in your permit status, you'll get an email and you can add everybody from your project team to that list. So here I can go ahead and put in the client, I can put in the contractor, I can put in the engineer. I just have to type their email address right in here. And as soon as the permit status changes, everybody gets an email telling them what the new status is and including that building department chart. The other thing that that we really felt was important is how do you do your permit process? So we've consolidated all those links that none of us can ever freaking remember and that the city seems to keep changing all the time. Like now you're gonna need masks, like when there's a change in those policies, and how you don't need appointments any longer, but here's a link to permitting information. Here's how you do your over-the-counter permits. Here's all the information about how to do electronic permits. Here's how you apply for your trade permits. Here's where you email your pre-app requests. Here's how you get your city records with the forms that you need to send to your client. And even for contractors, if you need to schedule inspections, we've just consolidated it all so people don't need to look it up or have it open on 50 tabs. We consolidated again, we aggregated all of the local codes, and clicking any one of these links is just going to take you straight to the health code for the city, or the fire code, or whatever the case may be. City contacts I use every day. I use the contact list. Obviously, most of us have probably seen this. You can get the email address and phone number for any plan checker. But I'm one of those people that rattles cages. Like, I don't have any problem going to someone's supervisor. So I use this chart all the time to see my current nemesis is Joe Ng. Okay, when I have a problem with him, I got to go to Richard Tam. There's nobody in manager. So then I got to go to Willie Yao, and then I got to go to Patrick O'Riordan. So I generally, if I'm having difficulty or something's taking a long time, or it's just kind of obnoxious, I'll raise things up the food chain. And this just helps everybody, know who to contact. And we've got the same things for inspection, services, planning, and DPW, although they don't have as good of public, they're not as outward facing and as transparent as some others. And then for our subscribers, we also do, every couple months we update, we go through the legislative proposals at both the Board of Supervisors and the state level to let you know, hey, Supervisor Mandelman has proposed conditional use for any residential addition of 2,500 square feet or more. That means you've got a 1,000 square foot house, you want to go to 25 or 2,600, you're getting conditional use. So that's a really hot one. He's introduced some stuff about ADUs and having to file more paperwork, etc. So yeah, I think that's this one. That's Mandelman's. So this gives you a link to the legislation if you want to read it. It gives you a little summary. On the state side of things, we'll tell you when it was introduced, by whom, and how the votes seem like they're happening, or what the current status is on those. So again, I don't like getting blindsided and having to go back to my client and say, hey, we've been designing your project for 6 months, but the rear yard setback changed from 25% to 30%, and it's retroactive. So now we have to redesign your project. Nobody wants that kind of surprise. Nobody wants to bring that to their client, and nobody wants to have to redesign these projects. I don't. So the more we can know about what's coming down the pipeline, I think the better service we can give. So those are kind of the highlights, the features, and a little spin through maximizing your use of the property information map. Anybody have questions?
No questions, but really grateful for this.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, I'm so glad you were all able to join me. I hope you were also chowing down on lunch while I was talking. And like I said, we've recorded this session, so we'll distribute a copy of the recording to everybody who attended, and even the people that it looks like were not able to get on today. So thank you all so much for joining us. And if you have any questions, I'm always available by email, Serina@sync-arch.com. Have a great one, everybody. Happy Wednesday.